Lingua Brutalica is a podcast that uses ethnographic interviews to study language use in the extreme metal community. We are studying a music scene known for its love of themes and topics generally considered offensive, and it is likely that some episodes will touch on topics or opinions some listeners may find tasteless or ethically problematic. Ethnographic researchers aim to adopt the interviewee's point of view so that we can draw out and study the attitudes, beliefs, and practices that are important to them. We want to make it clear that in presenting these conversations here, we do not endorse any of their content. Our aim is to explore the thought processes behind language use in this long-running, international, and yet understudied scene.
Hi, and welcome back to Lingua Brutalica with me, Jess Crook, and my co-host, Wes Robertson.
Hello.
Today we're talking to Sam Dillon of LO, that's L-O exclamation point. Thanks for talking with us, Sam.
Yeah, my pleasure. I can't wait to waffle on.
Wonderful. Well, you can begin your waffling by describing LO's music. What genre are we talking about? What kind of music do you play? Give us the rundown.
I would say that the best way to describe low would be progressive sludge, aggressive sludge. We've got elements of hardcore in our work, but definitely groove-focused sludge metal with a lot of anthem-style writing in it. Yeah.
On Encyclopedia Metallum, you're listed as sludge/post-metal and hardcore. How do you feel about those kind of labels?
I don't really like the idea of being called a post-metal band. That's just me being subjective and aesthetic about it, because I usually feel that's giving away sort of a lavender-scented toilet paper feel to music. I prefer it to have a bit more edge to it, but you got to know where you're from and where you're going. So I'm all about making it big choruses, anthem-y qualities, which is often overlooked in my genre of sludge. So sometimes it can just be one riff that rolls along forever until someone falls asleep in the corner. And I'd rather it to have some punch and to be able to get people thinking.
Well, is this the kind of metal that you would, be drawn to yourself? Is that the kind of metal that, got you into the genre to begin with?
Yeah, for sure. Like sonically, the atmospheres that are created with that, but there is like a turning point where I start to nod off if it's going too long. Everyone's able to express how they want to do it. But I much prefer things that have a bite to it and have a very genuine nature to what they're trying to do. And if it's got a bit of theatrics to it, then that's always going to help as well.
But was sludge the first metal genre that you got into? Like, did you take a journey in here, or how did you get to into the kind of music that you're playing today?
Definitely a progression. So I evolved I wasn't really into music, to be honest, growing up. I had music in the house from my parents' record collections, but it wasn't up until maybe I was about 8 or 9 that I heard Soundgarden's Black Hole Sun, and I saw the film clip early one morning on Rage before I went to attend Little Athletics or something and stare into a daisy field. But I just remember the images that I saw in that clip and the sound of the music, and I was hooked, and I thought that is something that I'd love to be able to express myself one day.
So was it kind of grunge into metal kind of pipeline?
Grunge into industrial rock, so your Nine Inch Nails, your Ministry, your Skinny Puppy, Marilyn Manson, and then slowly it was into more heavier stuff like your Pantera, your Obituary, sort of your thrash and your old school death metal, but always in the background there was things that I just obsessed with big choruses. So stuff like Peter Gabriel and Elton John are just as important to me as anything that's heavy.
So what then drew you to those heavier styles then? What made you, continue to explore heavier and heavier genres, not stop at your Elton Johns?
Well, before, like I was saying, I came into music a bit late in my childhood, but the one constant I've had my whole life is my obsession with dinosaurs and natural history. So the fact that there was human beings that sounded unhuman was a big draw card for me. I'm one of those nerdburgers that I just loved Jurassic Park so much that anything that that could make me escape this like human skin and be a bit more draconic or saurian in the way I did things, I was very very hooked on. I liked the idea of being able to create worlds in your like that are in the lyrics, but also have a more rasp to it, have something that is a Disney cartoon villain quality to it. So anything that's at the pulpit, you being a preacher and being able to like list off crazy megalomaniacal lines and have an impact with it, it's always going to appeal to me.
So you mentioned the lines there, but earlier you were talking about kind of the sonic qualities and the visual qualities of some of the videos. You mentioned kind of performance. Did you pay any attention to what was being screamed in the kind of dinosaur-y voice at the time, or
Yes,
what
yeah.
was the role of lyrics early on for you?
I definitely shied away from anything that was a bit lazy or sloppy. I'm not really into that. I was more drawn to things that had their bases in literature or film. Anything that was just your sort of grab bag of aggression, I kind of it didn't sit with me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So what is it about the like grab bag of aggression that doesn't appeal? Like, is it like the lack of thought, or just like the aggressive content or focus?
I'm going to sound like a snob here, but I feel I'm a bit elitist when it comes to art. Like I studied art at university, and I'm quite into that era of like Francis Bacon and the turn of modern painting. And I quite like that things have to be done with skill and thought and research. And when it's just sounds like a conversation between two people after too many Bundy and Cokes, it falls to the wayside for me. I much prefer something that's got its bounds in having to go a bit more cerebral or a bit more snide in the way that it's going to be sung. So I very, very rarely swear in any works I've ever done. And I try and have a bit of I'm obsessed with alliteration as well, just because I grew up on things like Roald Dahl and Spike Milligan as well. So anything that rolls off the tongue that can be a bit vicious and venomous in the way that it's delivered, I quite like that.
So I guess like you've got a carcass shirt on right now, right? So there's definitely some aggression going in there. What takes something into the realm from just being purely aggressive into kind of the more artistic?
I think if it can be done in something that required the thought, required the imagination, and paints a vivid picture, like there's plenty of metal vocalists out there that can deliver a fantastic performance, but when it comes to keeping me hooked and wanting to delve further beyond the page, then it starts to narrow the field a bit.
Well, given that aggression is such a kind of quintessential component of extreme metal music and particularly like lyrical content, like, do you think that like it's possible then to define or distinguish like metal lyrics from non-metal lyrics if they don't contain some of those more recognizable kind of aggressive qualities?
I think sonically is the thing that makes them metal. Like it's just the actual sound of it and putting on a genuine performance. Like there's plenty of metal bands that don't really sing about, like you could be a Christian metal band, you could be like I've noticed. So see, I'm not a stoner. I don't really enjoy marijuana. It kind of just puts me to sleep, and I don't talk, and I talk a lot. So that's like the worst thing for me. I noticed that a lot of lyricists that are stoners, they never really seem to sing about themes that are happening or characters that are on this earth or able to be tangible. It just becomes this gobbledygook of things like rocks and space and aliens, and that's fine, but it kind of loses me. I think with the aggression thing, I always have gone to aggression because I trust it, because it's that purity of I understand that emotional situation that's going on for me in my brain. But when it comes to other emotions, not until later in life did I have the maturity through therapy to be able to deal with them. And I feel that there's a lot of other people in the world that can do better jobs at singing about subjects of love or loss better than me, and I leave that realm to them. But aggression, especially at an environment that becomes more and more claustrophobic and more defeatist sort of culture, that tap is never going to run out for being aggressive in music. And you can always change your voice for it, but that aggression, I find a release in being able to express that and paint things.
So when did you first start writing lyrics and kind of painting these kind of aggressive pictures, as you say? Was Low the beginning?
No, not at all. I did some extremely cringeworthy things when I was a teenager. I had every bad haircut under the sun, and I have the lyrics to go along with it. It wasn't until life really kicked me in the ass from doing quite a bit of travel and moving out of home, experiencing actual hardships, and being around people that were doing the music out of genuine expression because they wanted to create it for their ears rather than understanding or trying to predict what an audience might want to hear. I definitely enjoyed performing, and that's exactly what I wanted to do, and I enjoyed the recording process. But what I was actually writing, it was impersonating the things that I really enjoyed at the time. I didn't have my own voice, but then again, I was only in my late teens, so that's to be expected. I don't think many people really want to be, if they get reincarnated, a 17-year-old again. So
I'll skip it. Yeah, pass.
Just you pretty much just want to be reincarnated with less crow feet and more money in the bank. That's the way it usually works. You want your brain now, but you can leave the rest of it and hope for a better lower back.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the lyrics, I was always writing from my teenage years, but I feel actual character fleshing out and looking at certain themes and returning to those themes, that happened in my late 20s. With my band Snakes Get Bad Press, which was kind of an abrasive hardcore band. So things like Trap Them, Converge, Lord Mantis, that sort of thing.
So what would you say are the main things that kind of distinguish your current lyrical approach from that which you used when you first started out?
I would say I'm making it for me rather than an imagined ear. That would be it. Also, I'm using certain very strong archaic themes that I have always am returning to, and the importance and significance of those things to me, I hadn't really even explored back then. So these are things I feel that they will follow me along, like on my shoulder, for the rest of my lyrical writing days.
So like practically speaking, how does that change manifest? Like what happens to your lyrics now that you're writing them for you rather than an imagined audience? Like what things would you do to satisfy an imagined audience that you wouldn't do now?
Well, you can do the old Hetfield and just do some fucking years every time you've run out of something to say.
I think it's the second time that someone's mentioned like Hetfield yes.
In that context,
yeah.
There's things in the world that consistency is what you want when you order spaghetti bolognese. So you always want it. It wants to be a global thing. It's enjoyed by many. It doesn't rock your world. It doesn't disappoint. But then that's where you end up. You just end up at a digestible meal with nothing much else to offer. And I'd rather create an experiment for things that stimulate me. And then through my genuineness, I would hope that at least falls on the same ears for someone else.
Well, it's good that you've mentioned this because it leads on to our next question, which is about this kind of long-standing debate in metal over whether or not lyrics should be considered kind of pure fantasy or reflect the kind of social meaning or authorial intent of their creators. So broadly speaking, where do you feel like Low fits on this spectrum? Like more towards like the fantasy end or more towards the directly reflecting your own personal views, identities, so on?
I like the idea of having style to burn on a record and having a lot of characters going on. a lot of different samples, some theatrics and some cinematic pauses that we're doing. But when it comes to like Dungeons and Dragons and this sort of thing of what you associate with your thrash metal, your hair metal, your like the golden age of like the early 90s kind of vibes, especially out of Europe, that's fine. Like, that's great. But I find the monsters and dragons of my psyche and my universe are very flesh and blood. So these are your tyrants of political nature. These are your own addictions. These are the colonialist monsters that we are ourselves, the fact that there's so much Eurocentric views of how things are done in this world, and also our mass extinctions that we keep bringing on. That's far more scary to me than any like cloak and dagger stuff that any like wizard on top of a mountain. I don't need to dream up at medieval torture because it's already happening right now.
Mm. So, I mean, speaking of these ideas of monsters and beasts and extinctions, moving to the lyrics that you've written yourself, one of the most common themes I'd say throughout is that of animals. Indeed, oddly enough, this is a theme that existed in Lowe's history even before you joined the band. The first two bands reference birds, parasites, serpents, horses, sharks, tarantulas, vultures, wolves, bleeding fawns, snakes, locusts, and leeches. And then the first album you were on, the 2015 EP, has apes, orcas, chimps, dogs, vipers, fleas, and livestock. 2017's Vestigial talks about mongrels, goats, apes, snakes, hens, monkeys, locusts, apes, apes twice, sorry, worms, horses, butcher birds, and snakes. And the newest album has the words worms again, vipers, rats, apes, and deer. Why do these images and metaphors of animals keep appearing through your albums? And is this a follow through of the work before you? Like, did you consciously try to pull this theme through, or did it just kind of happen naturally?
Look, it's funny you're saying all that stuff because I'm literally sitting above 4 terrariums full of snakes at the moment. So I definitely take my work home with me. I've always been obsessed with natural history. I like the purity of it. I love taxonomy. I love evolution. I have a Charles Darwin tattoo on my forearm. I've always been obsessed with how nature has adapted, and it's far more surreal than anything you could think up. When it comes to those sort of icons of like monkeys, apes, goats, beasts of burden, your snakes, your Garden of Eden sort of imagery, that's definitely something that is going to feature in the way that I write lyrics. That's part of my world. That's in my toolbox of what I know a lot about and that I will bring up. When it came to replacing the original vocalist after the Monstrum Historia album, there was a head nod to at least include some sort of theme, so it wasn't just completely different to what was going on. The Tongueless was me pushing forward a more sort of live abrasiveness that could be replicated once we went on tour. I've found that the previous albums, although they are wonderful and lavish, they do contain phrasing problems that can happen live because there's just simply too many words going on in certain points. And I felt less is more, and I preferred to have a more sort of preacher at the pulpit, large bellowing claims or imagery that could go with things on the Tongueless. But when it comes to apes, that speaks for itself. We are a glorified monkey on a spinning rock. When it comes to snakes, they are always in my life. I love herpetology. I love the imagery of what has happened. The fact that people are so feared or revered, it depends like where you go in which part of the world of what people think of snakes. And also, things like your beasts of burden, everything from Animal Farm to, Farthing Wood to all this sort of stuff. There's all different ways that people have anthropomorphized these creatures that have been with us since the very beginning. So we domesticated animals long before we did anything else. So that it's always a good way for you to inject some socio-political meanings.
So were you kind of stoked when you looked at the first two albums? Like, oh, this guy does animal things. I want to do animal things. Great. I could just kind of pull this through line through.
It wasn't a selling point for me. It wasn't me just going, oh, I can play Old MacDonald too.
Yeah.
Yeah. was me more just being quite impressed with the professionalism of the band. So I'd seen them playing around the scene for a couple of years on their first two releases. And I was blown away by that, the fact that an Australian band was taking itself that seriously and delivering on each release. So the way that I do things, although I like to joke around in life, it's my like defense mechanism for a lot of stuff that I can't control. When I am writing, I like to be as professional as possible. So I won't drink before I play. I always have got a handle on that sort of stuff. And I want to always make sure that what I am writing down, there's no money in this shit. So it's like, I want to make sure that at least the song is genuine to me, and perhaps my peers might take it with them somewhere.
Well, as you alluded to earlier, a lot of the references to animals in your lyrics do appear specifically in the context of animal exploitation or extinction. So, for example, Tongueless that you just mentioned does talk about captive orcas, dogs tortured, and megafauna, which refers to animals that have either been harmed or been made extinct, largely by human intervention. And the theme of extinction is then immediately taken up on the first song of Visceral in Hall of Extinct Animals. However, the rest of the album seems to move away from extinction, and instead animals are represented as characters or social types. So for example, there's a Judas steer, locust Christ, Judas goat, and heaven's sheep. Then on your most recent album, Gleaners, there appears to be use of animals as metaphors for human oppression and exploitation at the hand of other humans, described as ruling vermin, parasites, and rat kings, which sees kind of thematic connection with both your previous kind of two albums that you've worked on. So looking at these references collectively, we can see that the through line is comparison between human and animals, as in, megafauna, we are referred to as livestock. The last heard into the crush and told that after man, this sphere will cripple on. Vestigial then further speaks to we bowerbirds who use death to line our nests. And finally, Gleaners describes a rat king who is human nature inflated. So what's the purpose of exploring this relationship and comparison between human and animals, and this kind of connection to exploitation and extinction that you developed earlier?
I think that for me, I like the demystifying of the human being by saying what we are, which is an animal. So sure, we've got culture and stuff, but so do termites and ants. So I know that's paraphrasing a whole bunch of civilization down into a tiny couple of millimeters, but I prefer to see some humility in the fact that, and be humble about our existence, and the fact that we are nothing that special, and we only have one place that we are living, and we're shitting all over it every day. And I find it really awful that people take solace in escaping into too much technology, when really they've all just got to look outside, and there's enough magic going on, and enough horror, and enough birth and rebirth doing just in the natural goings on of this planet. And then if we disappeared tomorrow, you can guarantee that the rock keeps spinning and things keep evolving. I like the fact that everything's in flux, and that nature always is there doing its best to either get rid of us or we can work with it. The whole rat king stuff, and bowerbirds, butcher birds, these things, I love the imagery of how brutal and unforgiving nature can be. And we ourselves do a lot of cruel, monstrous acts. For every saint there is a monster as well. So even in my life, I have regrettably done monstrous things, and I've also done very saintly things. So you can't exist as a pure thing of good or evil. I don't think that's really how it works. But I would like to think that going forward, we actually understand that we're a part of the environment and not something that is ruler supreme over it, or thinking that we're these farmers that can just endlessly pluck from a feast that's going to keep going. Because the way I see it, it's a banquet that's already souring on the table, and we really need to check ourselves.
So this idea of animals kind of as metaphors links to the idea that, of course, animals have often worked in that sort of way in folklore and mythology. And you do mention at least one folk kind of creature spirit in your lyrics, which is the Wedico, a Native American cannibalistic spirit driven by greed, excess, and kind of selfish consumption.
Yep.
Does this connection between animals and folklore influence your own use of animal imagery? Like, do you see yourself using animals in lyrics in a way that's reminiscent of their use in folklore, or do you perhaps approach it from a different way?
Oh, I love it as a historian, as a person that enjoys mythology and enjoys folklore and oral histories. I think stories are the best currency that a person can have. Like, I'd much prefer to hear someone describe something through story than any other means. I don't want to look through a phone or something like that. I'd rather you just act it out and tell me what's going on. With the Wetako, the Wendigo sort of stuff, I love the imagery of the insatiable cannibal, which is what colonialism is. And this is so alien was the idea that someone could hoard wealth that could consume more than needed. And that's not just from Native Americans. We're talking about Indigenous Australians, Papua New Guineans, all this stuff. When white people or the locusts arrive, this is their impression. It is these people are monsters. They stop. They don't know how to quench their thirst. They just keep drinking. So that idea, it still rings true today, even if it's in a much more modern sense. I quite like reiterating that through the album.
I mean, along similar lines, there's the metaphor of a worm that appears quite commonly as well. So often a white worm specifically that appears, I think, 10 times on your newest record,
yep.
Outdoing all of the other animal references, and indeed, more than any animal reference that we've seen on any record of yours so far. So, is this idea of the white worm connected to what you've just been discussing regarding, particularly like, the effects of like colonialism and white exploitation? Or is this kind of a new theme that you're exploring in a different way?
I've mentioned worms of most things in all the releases I've done with Low, and it is partly like a subconscious nod to Roger Waters' The Wall and The Final Cut back from the late 70s and early 80s. I loved the fact that was brought up as that describing a certain kind of personality or a certain kind of behavior that was detestable. And white worms were actually from a biblical reference, which is what they would term back then in Hebrew would be maggots. So this was seen as something that showed the negative effects of being a glutton or from overconsumption or decay. So when I hear that, I think of us when we're a consumerist culture, that we are like white worms. We are maggots consuming far beyond our needs. And me reiterating that just means just how much we are degrading and decaying through this behavior.
Do you think consciously or unconsciously you select animals for metaphors that feel a bit quote unquote metal? Like you mentioned serpents, vultures, wolves, snakes, and vermin, but more kind animals like deer would only appear kind of bleeding out or dying, and you lack reference to, say, cute animals or animals symbolic of peace and joy like butterflies, doves, puppies. How much constraint does extreme metal as a genre place on the types of animals that you are able to discuss in your lyrics?
Oh, I could go. Look, I could write a death metal opera about a mantis shrimp if you want me to. But
yeah, I mean, well, like, I guess if I can push buttons a bit, we hear this a lot. Like, yeah,
the ladybird.
Well, we hear this. I could, right? We hear this. I could all the time on the podcast. Yeah, no, I could write a song about cute things, but no one does.
Yeah. No. Look,
so
I am. Like I said, I'm a bit elitist with certain things, and I do enjoy the aesthetic of those kind of animals. I've always been drawn to the overlooked, the ugly and the grotesque, but I don't find them that. So I'm obsessed with things like axolotls and tarantulas, false scorpions, really ugly pit vipers, that vultures, like lappet face vultures with their faces that look like, a person's testicles, really. But they all serve their purpose. They all have good connotations of, like, it just depends what part of the world you're in. So death death is always attributed to vultures, but then they're seen as a way of taking the dead to the next realm if you look in places like Nepal and Tibet. So it's all what you want to do with it. But I'm always drawn to the more reptilian, the more sinister looking animals. That's just me as an aesthetic thing, as a childhood thing. I really can't explain it more than the fact that I just really felt attracted to those sort of animals.
But just
it's a bit of a chicken and the egg thing.
Yeah, literally. Like is
it metal that's drawn you to like these kinds of animals, or is it your enjoyment of those kinds of animals that's the kind of indirectly drawn you to metal? I don't know.
I would definitely say the easiest way for me to communicate a genuine style of writing was through the realms and descriptions of natural history and animal folklore. I'm not going to sing about being a heroin addict because I've never done it. It's not something that is close to me, and I would feel ingenuine talking about something like that. But if we're talking about, say, folklore to do with the biblical history of maggots, yeah, then I've probably got a leg to stand on, and I feel quite genuine in writing that and being able to be poignant in a socio-political way.
But like, just as like a thought experiment, if you had like an album that just had like a ladybug on the cover, or like, if the words puppies appeared in your song in like a positive sense, do you think that would you feel any hesitation to explore that kind of imagery in the genre that you're working in, besides like that you prefer the quote unquote different style, darker animal?
I guess the fact that I've with the tongueless, vestigial, and the gleaners, which is about to come out, that's a triptych for me. So I've created an arc of work that can be viewed as three parts, but also consumed as a whole. So the fact that they were hinted in the first in the tongueless, and then they have the main arena in vestigial, and now they're still getting their dues and being accountable in the gleaners. I'd like to stick to the 4 or 5 core creatures that I've got. For something like puppies and all that kind of business, I don't know, because I don't particularly enjoy cats and dogs. It's very, very banal. I quite like, this is going to probably get up people's goats a bit, but I find that people that make their personality their dog or their cat, it becomes this sort of this hole that they're filling, and I feel it does a disservice to what the animal is. I feel like it's a caricature of what nature intended. And they come with so much riddled problems of inbreeding and chasing an aesthetic, and it's at the suffering of the animal. And I don't really like this whole puppers and zoomies and fur babies talk. I find that weird and corrupt. It's nature corrupted to me. So I'm probably never going to, in a favorably light or in interest, put puppies or cats into my songs.
So the metal genre itself, though, you feel that doesn't place any restrictions on the animals you can talk about?
Nah, you're a human being. You're limited by your imagination. There's plenty of you can be a buffoon and do that if you want, and as long as you've done it, as long as you've done it with genuineness and fiction, then I'm not going to say that's the wrong thing to do. There's plenty of funny joke stuff done by like Def Clock and Devon Townsend that I think is they're awesome party bangers, but it's not how I write. I'm not able to do that. Well, not with that level of skill either. So
yeah, well, this is actually something that's come up as well. Like, kind of, we've kind of made the suggestion, use the kind of thought experiment of including cute animals or cute themes. Is that people have often said they can imagine it appearing, but in a comical context, not so much in a really sincere or genuine context within metal. So yeah, I wonder if there's something to that as well, that it's less likely to be explored within in a genuine way.
Yeah, I every day, just to amuse myself in this mixed up world, I'll make up funny little jingles about I'll make up a song about an avocado holder. I'll make up a song about seeing a nativity scene in the front of a religious shop. For some reason, it had a velociraptor and a small panda in amongst the nativity. So he made up a song about that. But do I want to drag my bandmates into a studio and pay thousands of dollars to get it recorded? Nah, I'll be all right. I'll stick with what I know for now.
I mean, do you think that metal has to have kind of like, if there's maybe a trait outside of the, bands that are kind of having a bit of humor, there has to be like a bit of seriousness to the whole product? The art form?
I think, yeah, I would say conviction. That doesn't have to be seriousness. I'm more about, I want the work to stand beyond what we've done. I would like the words and the music to stand alone and be taken as a piece of art. And I like the fact that these last three records we've done, they do bleed into each other. They can be viewed outside of the constraints of a timeline. Like, you can just have the whole thing run for 2 hours or so and be able to grab the whole story. Conviction. I don't know why someone would want to do, like, in Australia, we seem to have this horrific thing that, like, when people will take down people by saying that you're a tryhard or a tall poppy syndrome sort of scenario. And trying hard is what you should be doing. You should be doing your fucking best. Like, I don't know why you would want to get up there and go, we're just going to give it a shot. Like, no, don't waste our time. Like, life's short. You'd want to make sure that what you're expressing is important to you. And even if it is a joke to you, like it's comical, well, give it some style, give it some class, and make sure that it's delivered well. Because if a punchline sucks, well, then you suck.
Fair enough, yeah.
Well, I suppose tying into the animal theme that we've just kind of discussed at length, are lyrics that explicitly, you've got quite a lot of lyrics that explicitly address kind of failings of Western culture and society that you've already kind of started to explore a little bit. So specifically, we're thinking of like lyrics from Vestigial that include Ill Lust of the West, Praise Our Western Bliss, Raise Our Glutton Kids. And your new release, Gleaners, has lines like Caucasian, Vulture, Monocultural, and The Vicious Vanity of Colonizers, which could, quite clearly apply to Western cultural contexts. I wondered, and this isn't like a gotcha question at all, but is there any sense of irony in addressing the ills of Western culture within a scene that's long been dominated by Western white men? And have you experienced any backlash for doing this?
Well, it hasn't come out yet, but we'll see, won't we? So by the time you listen to this, it has come out. And if I've been lynched by then, well, then that's my fault. But I would say that the irony is intended, yes. The finger is pointed at everybody in the room, including myself. So I'm well aware that I'm not Denzel Washington. So we have to, the way I see it, the way that I've painted these characters, I do it from an expressive point of view. That's my artistic license. And also I have my own self-loathing issues to do with what I am a part of in this story. So I love nature, and yet I am a stranger on this soil, and everywhere that you do go, we are under the amassed bones of fallen cultures and individuals, and through certain things that how you live your life and your creature comforts, you are hurting the very place that gives you life. So yeah, it's not a meaning lost on me, and I hope it's not lost on the audience either.
Has there been backlash on your prior albums for these kind of themes?
No. Like I said, it's very refreshing to be asked at length about meanings and themes in our music from a lyrical point of view. It often gets wishy-washed over. But yeah, it is nice when some people notice and want to have a conversation further about it. I think there's a good deal of room that can be done about lyrical content in all these metal genres, and you can touch upon things like xenophobia and racism and environmental collapse. So I'm really enjoying seeing bands like Napalm Death and Cattle Decapitation really striving ahead with what's going on in the world at the moment, and doing it in such a really over the top, expressive rock opera kind of way.
Is there any like additional kind of value, I suppose, in addressing these kinds of issues to an audience, as you said, who have been historically like the people that have perpetuated, if not committed, the ills that you're talking about?
Sorry, I understand that we are in the audience and we have been a part of this, well, this account of history. Yeah, sure. What did you want to know about that? What did you just
Sorry,
say?
I'm just wondering, like, is there like, if you were to, is there any additional value in kind of talking about these issues to an audience that like, has historically kind of participated in like those issues in a way that, wouldn't necessarily be the case if you were kind of discussing these issues with an audience that has kind of been on the receiving end of them or has intimate knowledge of them?
Yeah, look, I just want to make sure that the way that this inescapable sort of narrative that has happened, I'd like people to avoid apathy, which is something Australia seems to be very good at. And it's towards both our First Nations people and also towards our environment. And sometimes even just to anyone that's a bit different within your own group. And I would really like that this is seen as both an artistic statement and something that can be poignant and taken further.
I mean, there's that famous quote, right, of you can't tear down the master's house with his tools or something like that. But it seems like in your perspective, you are sort of using a genre that has had, its problematic history a bit to critique the very kind of culture it arose from. Is that, I guess, this isn't a question. Damn.
It's okay.
I mean, yeah, I guess how would you frame this? Like, is there a benefit in using the art form of the colonizer in a way to point at the colonizer that wouldn't be does that create a space for that dialogue to happen that might not be as effective elsewhere, I suppose?
There was a cool quote I heard the other day, and it was saying that art is just the more palatable politic.
Okay.
And I feel that, if you feel that you should be delving further into your own research, then go ahead, please do. Please pour over keywords and ask people. I like the platform about it. I like the fact that there is room for different interpretations, and I would prefer it to stand as a piece of music that has its roots in other things, and that if people would like to be able to find that and discover that for themselves and what that means to their own experience, then that's better than just banging your head.
So speaking of poring over things, one of the things we did in poring over sort of the lyrics you've written is look at your use of pronouns, because in general it seems that you have a preference for the first person plural form, we, over the singular, as you have 7 to 20 instances of I, me, and my across your 3 albums, depending on the album, but 17 to 51 instances of we, are, and us across the albums, with the difference in the instances of I and we forms increasing with each release. So you have, the gap is widening. Is this a pattern that you're aware of? And if so, is there a reason for which you prefer the plural perspective over the singular?
To be fair, I feel that the arch of the story from where I started when I joined Low to now and across those 3 releases, I feel that although I like to paint poignant observations of rather bleak scenarios and environments and issues, I started realizing that I do need to have a glimmer of hope at some point. And by including the collective rather than the single person view, we are all on this sinking ship together. And I like the fact that in the Gleaners things begin to start being held accountable, and that there is glimmers of hope, and there is a calls to arm, that there is a calls to action, and a bit of a war cry involved. I would say I have had a few moments over the last couple of years between releases where you do experience some extreme hardships and see the world through a different lens. And it's sort of shaped a more, I guess, chill in reaction towards impending doom, and being able to get some solace out of things and muster up some strength to keep going. But knowing that even though things are rough, that's that whole cheesy line of it's the darkest before the dawn. So I'd like to be able to have people feel that there is power to what's being said and the chance to make amends.
Well, then when you do sing about, like, from the I perspective, do you feel that you're representing your own perspective, or that of like someone else, a character, or like a more kind of generic type?
It becomes a mixture. It's like a multi-personality thing. So my performance is a performance of personality. I feel that even though these are monsters that I am painting of things that exist, there are facets of my personality that I can attribute to that, and that you can embody that mad preacher at the pulpit for a moment there in a song, and you can be the vulnerable fawn as well in that song. And unfortunately, I can't separate me completely from what I'm writing. I like to be able to illustrate these crazy characters, but there is truth that they're probably living within me as well.
What about the use of second person perspective forms? Because you have 6 instances of you on the first album, 18 on the second, and 24 on the third. And in many instances, it seems like there's some sort of opposition between the I, we, and the you, as in lines like colonizers' confidence, I was born to drain your through, I silenced your scholars, while spewing quotes of affirmation off gleaners, which show a very direct contrast between kind of the I and you. And this seems part of a larger distinction you develop, particularly in your latest album, between kind of two people in groups, an oppressor and an oppressed.
Yeah.
Are we reading this right? Was it your intention? And if so,
yes.
Do you have a particular? Oh, good, great.
Yeah,
Bang
on the money. Yeah.
Given that we have done our job, yay.
I imagine a kind of a fishbowl lens where you are hearing from the person in the front row of the congregation being spewed at with these false promises. But then you've also got the inner dialogue of the priest or the deacon at the top yelling out these lies, and what he's thinking, I'm going smooth through my yellow teeth. You can hear my false lies. And then it's people outside witnessing all of this happening. And then myself as even another narration outside of this viewing inwards. So I do switch between, and I usually that will be accompanied with the fact that my phrasing has stilted out, or my entire rasp has changed to another tool in my vocal technique.
So you can be both a protagonist and a antagonist depending on the location?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So one question I kind of like to I found interesting, it's something I've been thinking about, it was we've talked more and more about you with people, is what happens when you're live and you're looking at your audience and you look some fan in the eye and you're at a point where it's you bad, right? Does that is that hard? Does it create a glimmer of, oh, I just called out this kid for being the source of evil on the planet?
Yeah, right. Look, when I'm up there, it's muscle memory and it's all about delivering a genuine show to the lyrics that I put all that time and effort into. I'm thinking things as a large just screen, basically. Not seeing individual faces. I see the mass and I deliberately work to that. So it becomes this sort of large, organic, I guess, big soup faces rather than just one person. I'm not attributing personal judgment on the person in the front row or the person in the wings. I'm not thinking that. I'm thinking hitting that note, thinking shit, I really could have used to stretch my knee before I did this, like that kind of stuff. I'm not going too much detail about an individual's predicaments in front of me.
Well, looking at other patterns in your lyrics, something that we noticed as well was looking at kind of the presence of some, but not a huge amount of swearing. So in your 2015 EP, you've just got one use of shit. 2017's Vestigial has 6 swear words in total, so 1 fuck, 1 shit, and 4 instances of damned. And the newest just has 1 shit. So broadly speaking, what's the goal of including swear words in your lyrics? Is there a particular reason why you've chosen to kind of use them quite sparingly?
Usually when I'm saying it, it's the bravado of the character having a very sort of in the moment ego trip, usually, or it's just to, like I said, I like to diminish the mystique of a human being, basically. So I don't hold us very lofty. I prefer to think of all of us as flesh and blood, of us shitting ourselves when we're babies, shitting ourselves before we die. So that kind of breaking down of that is why that I would interject words like that, to give it that very just rough, grit, blunt delivery.
Is there a balance though? Like, can there be too much swearing in a metal song? Have you ever cut swear words during editing because you felt you've kind of gone too far?
No, because I feel that I've never had to rely on that. I'd rather use a different word if I can. And the only reason that I would use it in the first place is purely just out of that grunt, that visceral rasp that can go with delivering that. Sometimes it can completely change the context of what you're saying. It can either really bring the aggression home, or it can deflate things to just a very ending note.
I mean, metal's always kind of been a bit of a sweary genre, right? With kind of that counterculture. I'm going to do things that upset the mainstream kind of image to it.
Yeah.
Is it odd at all to kind of bring like, oh, I don't want to swear too much into that kind of space? Like, or is it like, does it have a role that it plays in metal that it wouldn't work elsewhere, or is that like just not even of interest when you're working on what you do?
Simply doesn't even come into my brain. Yep. But it's ironic that all this is happening, because when I talk day-to-day life, when I'm with my friends or family, I unfortunately do swear quite a lot. And I feel that is more to do with my background of where I grew up and the friends that I kept around me. They all have mouths like sailors. So that happens, and I do go into a sort of a like a very user-friendly vibe when I'm at work or when I'm talking on the phone.
Do you feel like there's effort to make your lyrics not sound like your day-to-day, to keep a wall between them?
Yes. Oh yeah. That's just that made me very excited hearing that. It's very true. Yeah. So my day-to-day life is interesting, but I do like to create something more than what is my day-to-day existence. I like to paint with where style is everything at your disposal. I don't want it to be just a day-to-day diary entry. I do enjoy bands that do that, and especially in the misanthropic sort of form of bands like, say, Robotosaurus and Lord Manus. I find that quite interesting, but I'm more jealous of the fact that they are able to do that in such a blunt, abrasive way. But that's just not how I do it. I come across in a more artsy-fartsy sort of way, and I'm more at home in an art gallery than I am at a tradies union. Yeah.
Well, that does come across in some of your like word choice, because you do have kind of tendency to lean towards kind of larger or at least rare words.
Yes.
Not always. There are kind of straightforward lines like our opaque plague, we're here to bleach your hearts away, pale regrets on offer, place that dark hand in the coffer. So these do exist. There are kind of like lines like this where you have like a maximum of kind of 2-syllable words that are generally quite recognizable to the average English user, but there's long been this sort of sprinkling of larger words that a listener may not necessarily be familiar with without kind of looking them up, on Google. So to pick out, some that have just appeared on some of your recent albums, we've got things like Sporadic Whims, Psychopomp, Pareidolia, Kleptoparasite, Vainglorious, Elysium Festooned with Rotten Meat, Mammonism, and of course Gleaners. So what effect or role does this kind of vocabulary have in your art and the messages that you're trying to create? And is this in any way a kind of metal way of representing dialogue?
Yeah, I think it's an acquired taste and an advanced palate for your word eating. I prefer to offer something that is not just straight away in your face. I like it to be really rich, visceral, tactile style words. That everything's a descriptive word that can be seen as a bit more decadent in the way that it's delivered. It also really helps with those sort of words when you're doing a raspy vocal technique, because it adds a bit of a to it each time.
I mean, I guess again, not to like poke and prod, but is a word like fuck not visceral and tactile?
I don't know. I just think it's not as romantic as the foreplay of the other words, I prefer to lay it on with some real thick goop of meaning than just punch you in the head. So yeah, I'm very Mr. Burnsy that way. I'm not going to be able to win in a fight with just my fists, so I'd prefer to be the weaselly one. But yeah.
Well, I guess just for another little thought experiment, what if we flip this around? Like, what if you use these terminology in your day-to-day and use your day-to-day in metal? What would be the effects of that? Like, if you took these words and put them into your, day interactions with family, friends, etc., or then took the more casual way that you speak and put it in the lyrics, what kind of things would happen then?
Well, unfortunately, I do go in and out of that. My bandmates can get a bit confused with me sometimes because they think I'm a bit cryptic in the way that I talk. So everything I say is in a very sing-songy sort of way. It's almost like I am phrasing or singing sometimes when I do have conversations with people. I would say that the only downside is maybe I start walking around with a cane with a taxidermy skull on top. I don't know. And then wear winkle pickers to when I walk down the street.
Sorry, wait, what?
Cockroach creepers, full Tom Waitsy shoes, mate.
Winkle pickers, like goth shoes.
Yeah.
Oh, like Wicked Witch of the West kind of things.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, I have not heard that turn of phrase yet.
Yeah.
Winkle
turn it a phrase, mate. It's the sport of princes. You got to get amongst it.
Yeah, no, I'm still learning the local language.
Yeah. Yeah. I just enjoy it, like for the crack, just to have a good laugh and to, some things in life are very banal. So if you can add us a bit of a spicy word to it and pretend you're ye old English, well, then that's going to pass the time in a more amusing fashion. And also thesauruses won't go out of business. So yeah.
Well, this is also like kind of an ongoing debate on the podcast, is like whether or not it's okay to use the thesaurus. So are you pro?
Okay, I've got one right next to me all the time. Yeah, I keep a running journal, and both in notes in my phone and also old school. I carry a little diary around with me to fill out anything that I see that's going to inspire me. So things like news headlines, a conversation I've heard on a train. Little monologues that I like in films or in TV series, and then in very, very dense non-fiction environmental dilemma books as well, and natural history volumes. Yeah.
I mean, there's a history of these kind of big words in metal, right? Do you like the genre kind of welcomes this sort of obscure vocab in a way that others wouldn't? Like say you were I don't know, a pop singer, or Low was a pop band, or like even a rap band or a folk band. Do you think you could use these same terms and get away with it?
You could if it's done with a killer beat.
With a
It
killer
really
beat?
can. So I feel people really do sort of scapegoat pop as not being very cerebral. But yeah, the kind of, I don't know what that's true for a lot of consumable, just flash in the pan pop. But then you've got people like Peter Gabriel and like even stuff like Def Cab for Cutie and that. These are amazing lyricists. They're fantastic. It's just they've done with a very palatable, very catchy beat.
But I mean, all things being equal, do you think that like metal sort of welcomes these, like, ooh, big words from the thesaurus kind of phrasing in a way that maybe other genres, again, let's not say don't ever, like, it's not like you'll get arrested, right? But is there a tradition you feel like you're being part of, or is that, again, not a concern at all?
I definitely think we're pretty inclusive as a subculture. All you got to do is attend a live gig and you're going to see a very mixed thing of people from different walks of life. But when it comes to that nerdy factor, I guess it's just down to the fact that at least within the people that create metal, most of the time it takes a hell of a lot of nerdy skill just to be able to play the stuff.
Sure.
So this is usually someone that's had to attend music college or go to university for long periods of time. They're around a lot of academics. They've already been into very imaginative things to be able to come up with their lyrics or the atmosphere of what they're trying to portray. They were nerds from day one. It didn't just happen because they decided to write metal. That was well before that. Yeah. And the outcast thing, it's that was maybe a thing growing up, but I found that these days that was when, back then it was because your social way that you signified that you were part of something was that you'd wear your heart on your sleeve. So your merch, your backpack or whatever, that is you displaying that you are part of a subculture and that I am hoping to be exposed or acknowledged by that subculture. But then when you look at things like Instagram and that, like, you just create that online. You just become this like supreme pizza of every single thing you like. No one needs to go and discover that for themselves because they already know about it. And people, it's no longer I'm an individual by, ironically being like everyone else. It just becomes this little taste test of every single other thing that people do. I feel like the individualness of collecting and being proud of what you are is sort of dying.
Well, yeah, going back to kind of like patterns in the lyrics and stuff, like, although we have certainly talked about like how you do prefer seemingly like longer, more eloquent expression, you do still have this kind of preference for shorter phrasing. At least that's how it appears in the lyrics. So you've got longer words, but like in shorter phrases. So like each line of your lyrics consists on average of only about like 5.7 words. So with lines off the tongue list coming in closer to 5 and the green is kind of close to 6.5. But there's a lot of lines that consist of only 2 words, even within both of those examples. So like lines like self-made, self-loathed, cruelty personified, we nullify inside, and Mammon's horn, holy grail. Are these patterns intentional at all? Like, are you trying to balance out more kind of uncommon longer words with shorter lines?
No, it's to do with fitting in with the riff, to be honest.
Right.
You've got to remember, like, the way we've been, I know that the podcast is focused on lyrics and why you're writing them, but let's just make sure that, I have to work in the environment that I'm being given. So Carl sends me these amazing cinematic riffs, and I need to be able to exist in that world. So I'm always wanting, I think that, sure, I put a lot of emphasis on what I'm saying, and I like to use elegant or very expansive words and stuff to describe what's going on. But I want the music to be hitting just as hard, and sometimes it's less is more. I really feel that you got to be able to let the riff breathe in a genre like ours. So if there's a solo coming up, if there's just that lick that's so good with the drums, I give it room. I don't need to be grandstanding over that top at all. Otherwise, you end up like Every Time I Die, and you just see a gig where a guy is losing his breath for 2 hours straight, just going, and you're like, mate, take a breath. I want to hear the rest of the band. So I'm very, very interested in tasteful use of words and having it complement the rhythm of what's going on with the groove.
So it's kind of a consequence of sludge specifically.
It's a consequence of anything that is that you want it, like anything that's got that tempo of you're riding the wave of the riff. Like you'll notice that rock bands like Queens of the Stone Age, prime example. He uses it in a way that his phrasing flows in with it, but it's never at odds with it.
Okay.
As Matt Hyde said, obey the riff.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, exactly. But then you notice some bands, though, it becomes more apparent later in their career purely because the hip's going out. So it's like the drums start slowing down, the arthritis kicks in, and it's just more pleasurable to give more space to the music.
So going back to something that you kind of mentioned at the very start of this interview, before we even started asking you specific questions, you said that you really like kind of poetic and like literary sort of themes. And we did actually notice a few of those. One is that your lyrics often include rhyming, like praise our Western bliss, raise our glutton kids, kept in fear's paralysis, scapegoats and witch lists, vestigial, and hellacious lights, blistering heat, Elysium festooned with rotting meat off gleaners. What do you feel that rhyme adds to the overall kind of impact of your lyrics, and what would you lose if the rhyme wasn't there?
I feel that in the past, a lot of things that come with rhymes come with a moral warning, and it's the easiest way during oral histories when you couldn't write or you couldn't get hold of stuff to write, that you did it in a sing-song way, and it always stayed more embedded in the human mind. So I'm very interested in having the impact land on a rhyming phrase.
Huh. So because of like the message, because you're trying to convey a message, it links back to the history of, I guess, message conveyance in English. Oh, okay.
Same as ringing around.
I did not expect that. I think that's the first time we've heard that.
A pocket full of posies. All that about the Black Plague, mate. No one forgets that rhyme. So I love the fact that something is wrapped in a slight innocence or a bit quirkiness of like a nice little psalm. Like I'm not a Christian person by any means, but I went to a Catholic high school and a Catholic primary school, and I can still recite to you every psalm that we were taught. And that's just embedded because of the sing-song nature of what is being portrayed.
Huh.
So is the explanation the same then? Sorry, go ahead.
No. It's just like, that's just we ask about rhyme a lot, and that's I don't think we've had an answer like that before. So anyway,
okay.
Yeah, sorry, Jess, go ahead.
No, not quite like that. Yeah. Well, I was just wondering, is the explanation then the same then for other forms of wordplay like alliteration? Because you have certainly a lot of that, particularly off your latest release, as in, sour stewardship, put the poor to powder, vainglorious vipers, pale pontiff, culture for the cannibal, lust hour, clarity, children of consumption, and even kind of complex pairs like hail, pseudoscience, pure hypocrisy. Is it the same kind of idea of using the alliteration to more easily convey a message?
Definitely. It rolls off the tongue better for me in my mind when I hear it. And I prefer that sort of descriptiveness that is very it comes in waves towards the listener. And I've always grown up loving musical theatre and theatrics, and I really enjoyed my time doing drama in high school. So when it comes to these monologues, this old school vaudeville style, I really enjoy the way that they used words to drum in certain meanings or certain key plot changes.
Huh. Okay. No, that's interesting. It's
stumped.
Well, it is. It's just very interesting. It's just I don't think we've talked to somebody that considers drumming in a message, like how to best drum in a message,
I think we've talked about it in the context of choruses or repeated like refrains, but less so in the context of like using wordplay and rhyming for that purpose.
Yeah. Like we've talked to people with messages that they want to convey and like how to best phrase it. Definitely in choruses, like they repeat this. But I don't think we've had someone say like rhyme and alliteration are used to be catchy in a way that makes it kind of stick into your head.
Yeah.
And like it makes sense perfectly. It's just I just wasn't expecting it. So it kind of puts me at a loss of doing my job and asking follow-up questions.
Oh, that's all right. See, I don't keep, like I said, I keep a diary running of lyrical things that I'd like to touch on in future releases or come back to, but I don't keep a diary of my day. I've never been able to. I don't know how I'd go about that because to me it's so banal. It's like writing in a usual event by event happening. I'm unable to do it properly, or I don't do it with conviction. It's almost like I feel like I've got to add something to it. I've got to give it a bit of highfalutin for it to be able to be interesting to me. So lyrics is that perfect thing of you're able to really zhuzh up what you want to convey. I find it very, I don't know. It's weird that someone. I'm stoked that you were taken aback by that, but at the same time, now it's making me feel a bit like inward on my own. On the world.
No.
Maybe I'm writing maybe when I write my shopping list, it's coming out like a like a French poet. I don't know.
No, like the goal is not to be. There's no value judgment here. It's not like it's good or bad. It's just we've had people mention like the impact of rhyme and lyrics they've liked. We've had people talk about alliteration, like even matching the beat, but like this will get the message stuck in the brain is just kind of new, especially given we mentioned that a lot of metal bands kind of like to hide like the idea that they even have a message, right?
Or at
least not even if it's not completely, like put it under the rug a little bit, right?
Yeah, it's more indirect,
the idea of like getting a message, not the lyrics, not the theme, not the melody, but the actual like message kind of hooked in the brain is I think I feel a little bit new in the data we've had.
Okay.
Yeah. That's not like and now you need to be careful about your shopping list. Like there's no implication of that.
Okay.
No.
Yeah.
Just like it's always interesting when we have something we haven't heard before, because we've talked to a few people. So
yeah, and then the edit comes back and it says you two going, that was the ramblings of a madman.
We had Party Cannon basically tell us that our entire premise for the podcast is wrong. So if we can do that, we can have
okay. Yeah, right.
In nicer words than that, but that's how I came around feeling after it.
Oh, all right.
Well, moving on from there, another thing that we notice that's interesting is like looking at your lyrics like from like just a written perspective is that you include a lot of punctuation in your the written form of your lyrics. So question marks, obviously pretty self-explanatory if you're writing questions, but you do also include marks that indicate reported speech. So quotation marks, like inject us with fear, that appears in quotation marks, hand me a gun, which appears in quotation marks, that appear to be like lines spoken by the Worms, if we're not mistaken. And you also include a number of exclamation points as well, like the Gleaner's Reign begins, exclamation point, and Mammon's Horn, exclamation point, off your latest release. So do you consider the written form create them? Is this like kind of a standalone document that you create that exists, in parallel to the lyrics as you produce them when you're performing on stage?
Definitely when I'm performing, I'm selling the song as much as I can in the way that I intended it to be heard, for sure. So when I'm always like pontificating what is happening. So in the Worms Lament, when I am calling to arms the gun culture epidemic of America, that is what I'm doing. I'm screaming out that I am that worm, that I am now armed, and that I am mindless and dangerous.
Why include like exclamation points, let's say, like in the written form of your lyrics when you're arguably screaming anyway?
I guess because you're painting lots of different shades of the same color. That's the way I would say. It's the fact that aggression is aggression is aggression is aggression. So there is different dials in that I'm doing of different characters. That's just more of a point that I wanted to drive home at that particular moment.
So does reading the lyrics provide a part of the picture that is not found in the audio portion of the art form?
It would be just down to someone's hearing, I'd say. Like if I always try and strive to have my stuff audible and digestible in that way, even though I do have that rasp over the top of it and the abrasiveness. That comes with the territory. That is how my voice sounds when I'm doing these particular deliveries. But I would like that my words aren't just bogged down and lost amongst everything else.
So one kind of thing we were curious about that is not present in any of your lyrics is any features of what we consider kind of Australian English or Australianisms. You're obviously from Australia. There's been Australianisms in this pot. I just learned one a few minutes ago for shoes. Why do you intentionally avoid kind of features of Australian English in your lyrics?
I think, well, it's interesting you say that, like, because the themes of the Gleaners, the album is basically my attempt at ending this triptych with an Australian dilemma of both bushfires, colonialism, the apathy that is towards our environment and people we deem a bit weaker or different. But I do give it that ability to take on a global context. When it comes to colloquialisms, you're right that you've pointed that out. I do find some sort of cultural cringe in stuff like, say, the band Luca Brasi. They're a fantastic bunch of musicians, but when I do hear those lyrics and the pronunciation, it kind of grates the back of my teeth. You can hear me talk, listeners, right now. I sound like a chainsaw revving up. And my voice is very like I sound from where I come from. But when I am in metal, I am inhuman to some degree. I am a bit more than what it is. I am this megalomaniacal creature. I am that worm. I am that fawn. I am that snake. And to me, in my head, that voice that it would have is not someone that's ordering fish and chips at Bondi. So that is simple as it can be, I would say.
Does this relate to the kind of the thing we mentioned earlier about like the potential the art form is distant from the day-to-day? Exactly.
If you want to have me for a job interview, then my persona and the way that I deliver myself is going to be completely different to the way that I am delivering a line in the middle of a set. So I do like to have a much more freer and more caricature of monstrous stuff when I'm doing music.
It was really interesting to me that in the middle of that, you did mention that you're kind of setting the album in Australia, because we did see, lines like led by denialists, colonizers' confidence, and could easily relate to the Australian context, if not do. And there are references to like Australian flora fauna, as in the previously mentioned presence of bowerbirds. So is there, despite obviously not linguistically in the word selection, I guess you kind of answered this, but can we go into more detail about kind of locating the album in Australia itself in a way?
I feel that besides, like, there are bands like, say, Midnight Oil and even pop stars like Gautier that have touched on socio-economic and socio-political problems and our environment under siege. But as far as, say, like a large concept album that's done in the heavy genre, like it's the sludge genre, I want ours to stand as a work in itself that can be seen as painting the picture of our little ecosystem of what Australia is going through. And I don't want it to have a set time and place, but I want it to be able to have those flavors that are important down here, and then it be able to be replicated elsewhere as well. So everyone knows what xenophobia is. Everyone knows what racism is. Everyone knows what extinction is looming. I just gave it my own lived experience of Australia amongst it.
So does this then like lend itself more to like the authenticity that you were talking about earlier? So, speaking from your own point of view experience versus that of someone, whose experience is broadly different from your own?
That's correct. Yes. I don't think I'd feel right being the author to someone else's story.
Okay, cool. So
for sure. Yeah.
Did you want me to elaborate too?
No, it's good. It's good.
That's great. Yeah.
Okay.
Just waiting for a potential follow-up. Never mind.
Yeah. So things like, I guess what I had written down during the week was the fact that some of the albums that were going through my head leading up to this sort of stuff was Gallows Grey Britain that came out in 2009. And I found that a very poignant, flawless album that was showing the ugly truth of modern day UK. And just the visceral, violent nature of how he showed warts and all what was going on in his life and what socio problems were going on in the country. It was done in such a way with so much theatrics and thought to it and samples. It really does like illustrate a really complex little world of all these totems of misery and I guess bleakness. But then it does have this hopeful note at the very, very last breath of the album. And that really inspired me that Australia is lacking an album such as that. So I used my own genre and my own words amongst Carl's riffs to be able to bring something like that to head.
Is it tricky at all using extreme metal to convey a message of hope?
I think it's the battle's still going. The battle is still going to find that. So like I said before, with emotional ability to communicate, I find that anger is the one that bubbles to the surface first. Pain and anger come first. And that is something that is there as a survival mechanism and that has been there for a long time, unfortunately. And I'm able to paint with that palette quite quickly. When it comes to the idea of hope and forgiveness and moving past that in a reconciliative way, that is a new one. And it is just, I think that it feels authentic to me to put that in this genre. And I don't know if that's a pattern that other people are trying to do in their releases, but it is a pretty ugly world out there. And sometimes you just want something that is a bit more hopeful and that is a nicer image to think of and something that does give you purpose.
Well, that leads nicely into our kind of concluding question, which is, if you were to speak broadly, what would you say is the role of lyrics and language in Lowe's music as a whole, and perhaps in extreme metal as a wider genre?
It gives a human soul to the music that is existing. Music speaks to us on different levels, and it resounds in us in a primal way, and we feel it and we carry it with us. But words, they convey the more emotive side sometimes, and it also shows the message of where everyone's head was at, what is the message, what is important to you, what is the things that you're trying to illustrate. So I can understand why there is so much focus put on the human voice, because it is something that it endures, just like those nursery rhymes we were talking about, the oral histories that can live on through this stuff.
It's kind of interesting, isn't it? The idea of a contemporary and very abrasive in a way genre participating in the tradition of the oral history, which is always, presented with people calmly sitting around a campfire listening to the elders. I guess the mosh pit and the campfire seem to have a bit of a different kind of, I don't know, image to them, right, in a way.
It's all very primal to me. It's man is obsessed with telling stories. We're obsessed with illustrating what we have experienced or what we imagine, or reaching for something that is intangible to make it tangible, to be able to understand what is going on around us. So I find that music and oral histories and art, they endure far longer than someone's like, like a court reading from 100 years ago. And it hits hard. It hits hard, and it's part of the fabric of the human condition and what we like about culture and society. I think without art, we'd be extremely bored and also very uninspired, and we would lose a lot of our empathy and a lot of our compassion very quickly if we didn't have an ability to create things.
Well, according to you as well, we'd lose a lot of knowledge, right? Considering that you were saying that, like, art is the main medium that we've used to communicate ideas and information.
Yep.
Historically.
That's correct. Yeah.
I mean, this is one of the more sort of hopeful, positive takes on what metal can do, I think, that we've ended with. Like, carrying on tradition, carrying on hope, carrying on messages, bringing community together. I mean, I vibe with it.
It's becoming more common these days.
Sure.
I think it seems to be, like, given our recent interviews, it seems like there is a kind of movement towards, like, the positive potential of metal.
Yeah. I think definitely after the pandemic stuff, you see the pandemic showed some really horrific sides of human nature, but it also showed an overwhelming ability for people to care and for people to extend charity and mercy to others. So I think it's a good step that to be able to have something that already a community that is bonded with and that understands where our head's at, that we're able to communicate with a bit of emotional maturity such as that.
Sick, yeah. So that's amazing. Thank you. So as you mentioned, by the time this drops, the album will be out for a little bit. You'll probably be mid-tour. What plans are after that? Where can people check out what you're doing? Where can people follow what comes next?
Okay, so online you could catch us at lookandbehold.net. And then we've got all our film clips up there and our tour dates and happenings, and you can get all our merch. And then as far as shows go, we do have a few little secret shows happening towards the end of this year in Australia. And we're very lucky that we're on Pelagic Records in Berlin. So we will more than likely be hopping over the pond to spread the Gleaners virus across Europe.
Cool.
Awesome. Wouldn't happen to be coming west side, would you? Or
Perth. Look, we've played a couple of really fun nights at the Amplifier in the past. I do enjoy Perth. There's plenty of shinglebacks wandering around, and the food's always nice. We get some, penile shrinkage going for a swim at Costco Beach. So nice. More than likely, if it just becomes. It's just a thing where everyone in the band has their own lives. They are responsible parents, and it is getting the time away to be able to bring some good quality shows to people. So it's less is more, but the quality is always high.
Good eye. Be glad to see you on the West, considering very few bands make the trip, it seems.
Oh, yeah.
I'm slowly learning.
Yeah. There's got to be like a halfway point on the Nullarbor. Just make another crowbar down there.
Just come down to Sydney.
Yeah.
You can crash to my place. You'll be doing a Sydney show, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
So you probably would have. Well, yeah. Make sure you come to the Sydney show that's going to be happening in the past when the time this comes to air.
Okay.
The future one, and we could be future boys. Yeah.
Amazing. There may be a picture. There may be a picture of me at your live show before the podcast comes out. It'll be very confusing.
Oh, right. Yeah. Gigception.
Indeed. Well, thank you very much, man. We really appreciate it. Yeah.
Oh, thanks, guys. It's been a wonderful little bit of a chin wag and a waffling on about what we did know and what we now know.
Great. Thanks so much.
Cool. Have a good night.
Thanks, guys. Catch you later.
Cool.
Bye.
Stay in touch. Peace.
Thank you for listening to Lingua Italica. We hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you stay tuned for our next episode. Before we leave, we just wanted to acknowledge that this podcast is recorded on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay respects to their elders, past and present.